Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. Before I introduce my guest, I want to share a couple of little stories because I love food. I love food, and I was fortunate to have this amazing experience growing up in my family. My mom, Linda, was a wonderful cook, phenomenal cook, and she inspired me to do this podcast, Should Have Listened to My Mother, so here we are. But the meals that we used to have, even though my parents were both Italian-American, we did not really eat traditional Italian-American food or Italian food. I was born overseas. I'm the last of the 7 kids, and the 2 siblings above me also born overseas. So we lived in Spain for a number of years. My dad was there on business. So we basically, when we came back to the States, we basically was, I guess what people call now is the Mediterranean diet. So we were constantly eating fish and or meat, veggies and salad and fruit and dessert, but not so crazy with the dessert. But every night the 9 of us would sit down at our dinner table. The candles would be lit on the table. The flowers had to be on, we'd run out to our neighbors and cut flowers, and it was absolutely stunning. So for hours, we would sit at our dinner table and talk and enjoy this delicious food. And then we'd clear the plates, and then we'd continue with coffee for my parents, and my dad would cut some fruit, and we'd talk some more of whatever was of importance that day. And during the summer, I grew up as a kid. I grew up on the water on Long Island, so we were always clamming and crabbing and fishing and bringing home whatever the catch of the day was. So Linda was whipping up these baked, beautiful whole fish that were baked and stuffed, and she'd be making paella, and there was always friends and family that were joining us, and we'd either be sitting outside with the candles and the flowers and that whole thing. So food is a whole magical thing for me. I don't have the time at this part of my life right now to spend that much time cooking, and I think my guest is going to talk about that a little bit. But when you say food to me, it brings back wonderful memories. So I'm really happy to introduce someone else, as I mentioned, who's passionate about food. He's a native Texan, a retired chef and culinary instructor and food and travel blogger. Chef Dennis Littley, welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jackie. And, you just evoked such a picture of just amazing dinner experiences. And I wish that we still ate that way. I wish that families still got together. And, part of my blog and my emphasis on creating restaurant style recipes, I try to say, I always tell people it's not rocket science. This is just food. You can do it. You can make this at home and, try to bring people back together at the dinner table, maybe not for hours, but, if we could get them back even for a half an hour, 45 minutes a night, I think that's a start. So thank you for that lovely memory you shared.
And we, we have 2 boys, and it was really important to them, and they still talk about it. And it's interesting because our backyard neighbor, years and years ago, we had a big July 4th party or something, and they're like, what's that little light that we see flickering in your kitchen windows? And for the life of me, I was like, what are they talking about? And they saw the candles on our dinner table every night. So it was just, oh my gosh, it was just pretty great that they were so inquisitive and wondering. So that's the perspective that I have, and not everybody has that perspective.
Oh, definitely didn't have that growing up.
But it was my mom who did that. My dad was working, and my mom was clearly working in the house, and she went on to do other wonderful creative things. But I want to hear the role that your mom played in your life and how you became, or who influenced you to become who you are today.
Well, in an offhand way, she had the greatest influence in me becoming a chef and learning how to cook, because sadly, she didn't cook very well. She was a nurse. She had been one of 10 in a Mexican household. And they sent all the girls to nursing school right away. They didn't stay home. The younger ones did. And the younger ones learned how to cook from my grandmother, who was a freaking amazing cook. And she was also college educated. She was a teacher. My grandfather was a minister. He was college educated too. And they just thought there was a lot of importance to their children going to school, being educated, and, just doing something with their lives. And therefore, my mother was one of the most amazing nurses I've ever known. Just really gave great service, great care, but she had a hard time cooking. And the love was never there.
What's your mom's name?
My mother's name was Eunice, and her maiden name was Cueva, and which translates to cave in Spanish. And my grandparents were from Aguascalientes in Mexico, and my father's side of the family was from England, Ireland, all those British Isles, and even some Viking in there. Kind of quite a mutt I am, but my mother's ancestry also goes back to Spain. So my grandfather was a tall, blue-eyed, blondish hair, 6'2", Spaniard looking, and my grandmother was a squat little Mexican woman kind of looking. Well, since I know her, and after having 10 kids, I guess that's what happened to her body too. But
so where was your mom raised, in the U.S. or in?
My mom was raised. All the kids were born in Texas. Okay. My grandfather came over with his ministry. It was the First Church of Texas is what he joined. He actually was at the White House twice when Lyndon Johnson was in office doing service. And he came over, and it was very important for them to speak English. She said they had a hard time differentiating it when they were younger because they were speaking Spanish and English. But they wanted them to assimilate. And my grandfather ended up going back to Mexico with his church, and my grandmother said, "Nope, no way, no how, I'm staying here."
Good for her.
Yeah, she loved the United States. Her kids were all here. My uncles all served in the armed forces. Had an uncle that was a Pearl. It was just,
they were American. They were American.
They were an all-American family. They really were, and they were proud of that. And my grandmother would spoil me. She would cook as fast as I would eat. And she pinched me and I was a chubby little boy back then too. She would pinch me by the cheek, and she just loved me to death. And that's really, I think, it wasn't that my mother she wasn't a good cook. She wasn't a bad cook. She just did not have a love in it. But my grandmother I knew she loved to feed me. Even at an early age, I knew she loved to feed me. And I think that really made me enjoy food even more. And that's kind of how my passion runs. If I'm feeding myself, I'll have a cheese sandwich,
Right. Whatever's quick and easy.
Yeah. My wife cracks up. I always have a couple blue boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese around. and I eat it out of the pot. So,
you're giving your secrets away, Dennis.
No, I love good food, and I love to make good food. But if I'm not making it for somebody else, the joy isn't there. The whole emphasis of the whole happiness for me is sharing it with somebody. And that's kind of goes with my blog too. So even if I'm not cooking for anyone, like if I'm working when my wife's away, I'm taking pictures of it and I'm making, so the joy is there because I'm sharing it with my readers. I want them to feel the love that's going into it. And that's a big part of cooking is having that passion, that love. And that's one thing. Actually, my mother got that in her later years. It's amazing. When she was retired, she moved into a senior complex and she started cooking for her friends and they would cook for her. And all of a sudden, she was enjoying cooking. I think for the first time in her life, she really enjoyed cooking. So.
When there's no time restraints or there's not a screaming baby you have to feed, or you've got baseball or softball or something to run out to and they're hungry and then they're going to need to eat at 9 o'clock when you get home. It's the romantic part of it is just there.
I know when my parents met, they met in the Army. My mother outranked my father when they got married. But they met in the Army, and I know they loved to have a good time. They went dancing, they went drinking, they went listening to music. When they weren't off to war, my mother served in a wartime zone too. But they had a really good life, and they had us. And, my father suffered a lot from PSTD. They didn't call it that back then, but he had some issues. And, my mother would cook for him more than cook for us. So she would make foods that he grew up in Philadelphia enjoying and eating. Like, she made spaghetti sauce out of, I don't know if you ever heard of a thing called spatini.
Yes, I
Do you remember
have,
that?
but I can't tell you what the ingredients are.
It's a box of spices, and you would add it to tomato puree, and that was your spaghetti sauce. And even as a 9 and 10-year-old, I knew it was horrible. I actually drug her into school with me one day to ask the school cooks how they made spaghetti sauce because it was so much better.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
But the poor woman, I must have tortured. God, I know she loved me a lot because I tortured her. She worked nights so she could be home during the day to pick me up, be home when I got home from school or to pick me up. So she would work 11 to 7. They made a special shift for her so she could be home to get me off to school. She was a nurse, or she'd work 12 to 8 later on. And it was, and that's one of the reasons I started cooking too, was, she'd be asleep and I wanted to eat. I'd round up my bottles and go for deposits, and I'd ride my bike up to the corner store and I'd buy, I remember buying like stewed tomatoes and a box of pasta, and we had cheese and making something up with melted cheese and tomatoes in it.
Yummy.
Yeah, this is again when I'm like 10, 11 years old. And that kind of started it too, being allowed to do that, having to do that, wanting to do that, because then I would feed her. And I think that was part of the joy too. I would feed her lunch because she had been working all day, all night, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so she was the reason I think I really started cooking, and I cooked more, and I really went into the field, I guess. There was never, I wish you'd be a doctor, or I wish you'd do this. It was always like, I want you to be happy. Back then, that was all it was. So there was never any great expectations on who I was going to be or what I was going to be, as long as I was going to be happy. That was it with her.
Right. It's pretty great that at a young age you had that insight to not only feed yourself, but also know that your mom would want to eat too. That's pretty cool. That's pretty great. Now, didn't you used to go to libraries and read cookbooks, read recipes incessantly from cover to cover?
From cover to cover. Yes, I did. When I was starting to open, a friend of mine wanted to open an Italian restaurant. And I took out every cookbook the Atlantic County Library System had and read them. And when I opened the restaurant for him, it was too Italian. He was a Philadelphia, like American Italian, and some of the stuff he didn't even know what the heck it was. And I'm like, well, this is from this region, the Abruzzi region of Italy, and this is how they make it there. This is from, and it was like I had to scale it back a little because I was scaring people. They had no idea what I was making.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. Like you said, it's just food, but it can still be like, I don't bake it all. First of all, because I will wind up eating it all, but it's very precise, and I'm always like, well, that's too much sugar, so I'm going to put half the amount of sugar.
I have found
I'm not that good at that.
Yeah, I bake for fun, and again, these days, as we get older, our health becomes a little more important to us. When we're younger, it's like, I'll worry about that when I'm older. Well, guess what? I'm older now.
Yeah.
So I worry about it, but my blood sugar was up a little high. It wasn't terrible, but for me, it was like, oh no, with everything else I got going on, I don't want to be diabetic. So I kind of cut out all the desserts. I cut out the bread and the pasta for the most part. And, and now I eat it maybe twice a week, kind of a thing. But I wanted, in no uncertain terms, to kind of bring that down and bring my A1C down. And I still love to cook. And when you were talking about the Mediterranean diet, that is my favorite, just because on our first trips to Italy, one of the major things I learned was Americans cook Italian different than Italians cook Italian.
Yes, it's very different. Very different.
Yeah. And that's where I learned, all right, olive oil, salt, pepper, maybe some herbs.
Lemon.
If it doesn't stand on its own with that, there's something wrong with the protein, with the fish, with the meat. If it needs a sauces are wonderful, but if it needs a sauce because it doesn't taste good, there's something wrong.
Yeah. So when your mom started to cook, what was she cooking? Mexican food, or she just was cooking American,
She
whatever,
she
international food?
never learned to cook much Mexican, and that was like my
Wow.
saddest moment because she couldn't make tamales. Uh, she could make enchiladas, and back then, when we moved from Texas in the '60s, you couldn't find a tortilla anywhere. People did not know what a tortilla was, right?
Right. You couldn't go and get the packages.
Yeah, they couldn't even pronounce it, let alone know what it was. There was two sad facts of life when we moved to Texas, from Texas to New Jersey. One, there was no Dr. Pepper, and there were no tortillas.
Oh my goodness.
That almost broke my heart right there. And she would fly back to Texas and bring one suitcase full of tortillas. She could
No
make
way.
flour. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Because
Instead of making them, instead of,
well, she could make flour, but she couldn't make corn. She had never been taught to make corn tortillas. Flour tortillas are pretty simple, and she made really good flour tortillas. But
oh,
again, the woman was working
all the
all these
time.
hours, barely. I don't know how she made it through sleeping the way she did. Because I would torture her awake, um, and the thing that she made for me regularly, or more often than other things, were refried beans. And she'd get her pressure cooker out and she would cook pinto beans, and we'd have them in the she'd cook a whole pot full, so we'd have them in the refrigerator for a week or 2 weeks and refry them. And she'd make some tortillas and I could have them with them. And if it was a really really special occasion and she had gotten some sleep, she would make fried potatoes to go with them. So slice thin, like potato chip style almost, and fry them. And back in those days, we used lard because we did not know lard was not good for you.
Yeah.
Because lard tasted good.
Now, are you talking about lard from either cooked chicken or bacon fat lard, or
I'm talking
Crisco
about
lard?
lard from
Lard,
pork back in the
lard from
days.
pork,
Good
the
old
authentic
lard,
lard.
the authentic lard, and my father fried his eggs in it. Um, it was just, again, before we knew the
What was what?
ramifications of
Sure.
it. Just like McDonald's French fries cooked in beef fat were the best French fries they were, until we found out that was going to kill us. Big surprise, French fries are going to kill us. you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So when
uh,
you've mentioned a couple of times how were you tough on your mom? Were you a challenging child to discipline?
yeah, I was a wild child.
Why?
It was just my personality. She named me Dennis, and she named me Dennis after Dennis the Menace. And
No, don't
yeah,
even say.
she did. And then I think God punished her for that, because she said, well, that's what you want. That's what you're getting. Uh, my brother, black and white, mild, quiet, studious, the really overachiever and the really smart one. And not that I'm stupid, but he was really brilliant.
Is he
And
older than you? An older
yeah,
brother?
he's 7 years older.
Okay.
My mom had gotten pregnant once in between, and she lost the baby early. And for a while, she didn't think she could get pregnant. She had been exposed to too many X-rays, and she thought that was it. She said she didn't have her cycle for like 7 years. It was like
Mm.
almost the whole time she was waiting for me. And then they were getting ready to come back from Japan. My father had been stationed in Japan, and she got pregnant while I were in Japan. And she told me they were getting ready to get a divorce because she was just tired of the army life, tired of moving, and just was done with it. And when she got pregnant, that changed everything. My father got out of the army. I was born in Louisiana at Fort Polk, and went right to Texas after that. And I always claimed to be a Texan because I think from 6 months on, I was raised in Texas. And my mother says, they put something in the water. So once a Texan, always a Texan, uh, kind of a thing.
It seems like you were able as an adult to talk about things with your mom, and obviously she told you about losing the baby, and
Yeah,
then so you spent that time. You took advantage of having your mom with you as an
I
adult.
did. Not as much as I should have or would have because she was easy. She was so easy. I mean, I would go to see her, and from the minute I got there, it would be like, "All right, honey, don't stay too long. You don't want to be in the traffic." It's like, "Mom, I came to see you for a while, and it's okay." I would call her on my way home from work. The last few years. And she'd say, "Oh, aren't you tired of talking to me? I tell you the same stories." I says, "Mom, there's going to be a time when I don't get to talk to you." She said, "No, I'm not tired of talking to you." Um, and I was closer than my brother was. He was hours away, and I was an hour at most away. So it was never a chore, but I was the one that, when she started to fail, I was the one that was left to take care of most of the things and so I could see her the most. And I never resented that or anything. My brother was good to me and, he was good to them. It was just a matter of me being closer. And I'm happy that I was able to do that. But
Yeah, I was going to say
yeah,
it's advantageous in the
yeah,
long run, right?
yeah. But it was the same. My father, I walked in the door one time, and my father goes, "Dennis, let me see your hand." And I show it to him. He goes, "No, Eunice, it's not broken. I don't know why you didn't call."
Oh,
Right.
oh, you're one
So
of
I'd come over.
those.
Yeah. I maybe I hadn't called that week, or maybe it was 2 weeks. I don't know, but I hadn't called, uh, and I'd come over to cut. No, it couldn't have been that long because I'd come over to cut the grass, and I'd be out there cutting the grass for 15 minutes, and my father would come out and goes, "Your mother says to stop for a while and rest." I'm like, "Oh my God, I came over to cut the grass."
You're a mama's boy.
Yeah, I was her baby. And funny story, she worked at a hospital in Atlantic City, and I would take a bus in and I would walk the boardwalk or go to a movie. And this was when she was working day shift because I was older and she could do that. And she would work till 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And I'd walk the boardwalk, go to a movie, and I would go to the hospital to get a ride home with her rather than take the bus. So they knew me. I'd walk up on. She was in the maternity ward, labor and delivery, and the first time I walked up there, they almost died because and here I am. I was 13, 14, 5'10", 180 pounds,
Wow.
and I walked in and they go, "Oh my God, this is baby Dennis."
Oh, she
That
loved
was
you.
evidently how I was referred to.
Yeah, for 15 years, 13 years.
Yeah, baby Dennis, baby Dennis. So. But
Did
yeah, she said, again, you're the youngest, you're always the baby, and that's just the way it is.
and did you have chores? Were you supposed to do chores at home as a kid?
They were probably too lax with me, which probably aided to my wild child streak, my being too out on my own and independent.
Rambunctious.
Yeah, I mean, I started working at age 12. I got a full-time job right after eighth grade, flipping burgers, and by age 13, I was the manager of the burger place. Um,
Is
it
that
was just
legal? 12?
No, he met me under the table, and minimum wage was $1, and he was paying me 75 cents an hour. But I was making $32 a week, and to take the bus was 35 cents to Atlantic City. The Steel Pier was $5, and you'd go in there and you'd see two movies, a band, a stage show, and it was air conditioned, which was the best part. In the summer, you'd go in and sit in these places. It was like living was cheap. It was easy.
Wow, that's great. And it is that we're talking about Atlantic City, New Jersey, so it's right on
Yeah,
the ocean and the
yeah.
boardwalk, the
Before
famous boardwalk.
casinos, when it was, when I was, I think 15, she'd let me take the late bus home. It was 1 o'clock at night. And there was never a problem. I mean, I was always had a friend with me, and he would go a little further to Egg Harbor, which was like another 5 miles further. I mean, we were always on the bus together, but I mean, it was not something you had to worry about. If I was walking home from the bus station, a cop might pick me up and bring me home because they knew who I was, and there were easier times to live in.
Yeah, but she was always concerned and worried about you, I'm
Oh
sure.
yeah, Yeah. Well, when I did that, she was back on night shift, so she would be getting home, around 12:30. I remember one night after working, there was a corner bar, and I went over with the guy I worked with, and he says, "Go in the bathroom." And I went in the bathroom. I came back. He says, "All right, there's your drink." It was a Coke. Well, it was rum and Coke.
Oops.
Yeah.
How,
Well, yeah, I was
12?
like,
Are you still 12?
no,
No.
I'm like 15 at this point, 14, 15. I was getting drunk as a skunk. Okay. And it was funny. And I start walking home because I know my mom is going to be coming home, and she picks me up. And I get in the car, and in the morning she goes, "You were really quiet last night. Are you all right?" And I'm going, "Oh, you knew I was drunk. I knew I was drunk." But she never mentioned it, never said a word. So,
Did your mother ever travel with you for your work?
no. I mean, as a family, we took trips. We went to Texas went back to Texas one time. We went to Vermont a couple times. But again, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. Um, my father worked his way off the docks at a boat company as an electrician to be the general service manager. He worked his way up through the ranks. He was an intelligent man. He was a leader. He had been a major in the army. He knew how to lead people. He knew how to do things. But he also drank a lot because what the war did to him. So, that was the other side of that coin.
Oh, definitely took its toll, not only on
Yeah.
him, but and so many that never led on to it.
No, and again, we grew up with that philosophy, just suck it up, like Peyton Manning would say, just rub some dirt on it. That's how his father, you get hurt. I saw a cartoon the other day, and it said, "I fell off the jungle gym, and I think I was actually dead. My mother had me walk it off." Now, my mother would never have done that to me because I was her baby. But I mean, that was more how we were treated back then. It was like, just, all right, just walk it off, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it didn't happen. My dad never, he was in World War II. He never spoke about it
No.
until I was driving my parents down to Florida. I know the best place to have conversations are in the car because no one can get out. Not that he avoided it, but it never came up because it just brought back too many
Oh, yeah.
memories for him. But it was really wonderful to hear his stories. As I'm sure your mom had a million wonderful stories about her siblings and her parents. And
well, she served in World War II. She was in Italy and Germany, and she had some great stories. She actually, one of the stories, and there was a nurse's wall in Washington where they got to put memories, and she put that up. And her memory was climbing down a rope ladder on the side of like a big ship where they had to climb down into boats from the ship. Mm-hmm. And the nurses were in skirts. It was like, that's how they made them dress back then. But she said she thought she was going to die the whole way down, walking down. Another one of her stories was she was supposed to come home. And she said, "No, I'm going to wait for my husband to get here and we'll go home together." Well, the ship she was supposed to come home on was sunk, was torpedoed by the Germans. So it's like, just out of luck, she didn't do it. She knew
and
better
thank God your father wasn't on that, waiting for her to, know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And when she was sent overseas, they tried to send her overseas before my father did. And she wrote the Secretary General of all the nurses and said, "No, I'm not going to leave till my husband shipped off. I could just get pregnant like the rest of them and not have to go at all, but I'm willing to serve." Well, the Secretary General of the nurses wrote back to her commander and said she will stay there till her husband's son goes out.
Wow, she's something else, this one. She's spunky, your mama.
Oh, yeah, she would not get mean hardly at all, boy. But when she did, mama, you didn't want to be on that end of that.
Eunice, I think this is the first Eunice I've had a conversation about. She sounds wonderful, Dennis. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story.
She was a great woman. And, people always say, I see kids today blaming their parents for everything. I says, not me. I had great parents. If I've screwed up, it's been on me. It's not on them.
When you think of your mom, what would be the food that you would associate with sitting down with her and having a delicious meal? What would you make for your mom today?
Well, if it was me making, she used to love, and it was again a simple dish when I first started, when I was married and was cooking, was I made a rice dish that had peppers and onions and bacon and lots of cheddar cheese in it, and she loved that. We would sit there and the three of us would eat a whole casserole dish of it. It was so good. That was something that she really enjoyed that I made. And then later on in life, when I was a chef, she got to see me as a chef and got to come to the restaurants I worked at. And I remember one day telling her, I knew she loved tuna. She used to always talk about this guy my father worked for, giving him fresh tuna and how good it was. I mean, it was always, oh yeah, your dad brought home this tuna. This tuna was so good. Well, she comes into the restaurant and I go, Mom, I have tuna. And she looked at me and went, I had it for lunch.
Exactly the same thing.
I'm like, oh, God.
She had
she had tuna fish,
right?
but a sandwich. But I'm like, all these years, all I hear is how good this tuna was. Mom, I got tuna.
Gosh,
I had it for lunch.
So cute.
She used to love a place called the Old Country Buffet. And in her later years, when she was living in the retirement community, that was her favorite place to eat. You pick your food. She had really good fried chicken. She'd get a cup of half decaf and half regular at the end, and we would sit there and talk. It was like always our place to go. She just enjoyed being there. And even when she was getting worse, I'd go get her food for her, or I'd bring the walker in, and we would still go there. And we'd get her. The managers knew her. They loved her there. It was just, and they all knew they know I take home food. She'd be wrapping up a piece of chicken. I said, Mom, you hardly eat anything. I don't
Right,
think
and a
care.
napkin. You mean she'd wrap it up in her napkin, right? And stick it in her bag.
Wrap it up in a napkin and put it in her purse. Yeah. But the things that I remember her would be the refried beans, and every now and then she would make me apple turnovers, and they were really good. Not often, but every now and then.
Hungry. Oh, Dennis, thank you so much. This was really wonderful. Right up my alley.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I mean, it was nice to talk about her. It's not something I think about talking about her or do get to do very often. So it was nice to talk about her.
Chef Dennis Littley. You can find Dennis's info online at askchefdennis.com. And again, he's a food and travel blogger, a chef, a speaker, content creator, and digital strategist. He does a whole lot of really great things on top of cooking beautiful and delicious food. Thank you, Dennis, for joining us on this week's edition of Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you so much for having me, Jackie. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show and talk about my mother, and I really miss her. I know I'll see her one day again soon. So,
I'm Jackie Tantillo, and a shout out to all my listeners and supporters listening on KPPQLP Ventura, California at 104.1 FM. And you can also stream it on the MyTuner app and on capsmedia.org/radio. See you next week.